So the SARM planning department, so we are a department of two. We were established back in 2009 at the request of our members. So we provide a number of services to our members at a hourly fee for service. The most of our time, I think, is spent drafting official community plans and zoning bylaws and amending those plans. We also help, I think, secondly, most of our time is spent with development permits and reviewing subdivision applications. So we review them for the development officer or the administrator and provide recommendations to them and council when moving forward and responding to these types of inquiries. So what we had tried to do today is have Alan kind of give you the rundown on what the planning legislation is and the framework, what that is in Saskatchewan. But I'd like to kind of go through how to create an official community plan and zoning bylaw, what's actually in them more specifically, land use planning for environmentally sensitive areas. So I'll talk about that and incorporate, okay, so what does that mean? We have species at risk in our region, so what does that mean for our individual municipality? How to use these bylaws, how to go about amending them. I know Alan had kind of talked about that, but I'll just kind of briefly go over that, and how to work as a region maybe more on having consistent regulations and policies in the area. So I don't want to repeat what Alan had said, but I think it's important just to kind of set the context. So really, what is planning? And I think we all know it encompasses a lot of different subjects. So it looks at the physical environment, the economics and social aspects that's going on in your municipality. But typically when we think of planning, it's basically the creation of policies and regulations for a municipality. So you're dealing with the use of land and the future of the community, right? So you're planning for growth just as you would your future. You go to school, you take some type of training, or you get a job, you get married, you have kids, right? So it's kind of the same thing, but in a land use planning context. So why do we do it? It's not mandatory in Saskatchewan. It is voluntary. So it's up to you. It's the responsibility of the local government if you want to be involved. So you have to choose that if you do want to be involved. So plans or planning basically will allow you to tell people, the public, future investors, and even future councils or future staff members how the lands will be managed. So it guides those actions that's made on land use. So it helps you manage growth and the pressures and how to accommodate that type of development in a planned and organized fashion. It also allows you to look at what's existing and what can we do to protect and preserve that. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about species at risk, and it gives you as council the authority to say yes or no. Yes, this is appropriate for RM. This is kind of how we want to see the future of our community grow, or maybe no, maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe we shouldn't allow that type of development here for such and such a reason. So Alan had gone through this specifically. So if we do want to make plans or look at planning and what involves, we have to look at the provincial legislation. So we talked about the Planning and Development Act. So that's where all of your authority stems from. So if you do want to create these plans, we have to look at, what does the PDA say? What do the statements of provincial interest or the SBIs say? There's the subdivision regs and dedicated land regulations that would have some requirements under there that we would have to look at incorporating. So from there, you could create your individual official community plan and zoning bylaw. And then there's different roles that you guys play, and Alan had gone through all of these that are involved in the planning process. So official community plans and zoning bylaws and all that. So I think when I had checked community plan, you guys have a map that shows which municipalities have plans and which ones don't. I think it was from 2011, and I believe there's about, 77% of RMs had plans. That was in 2011. So there might be a little bit more. I know we're working with about 10 of you that didn't have plans, so there's a little bit more. And actually, I think that's more than the urbans, isn't it? There's less urbans, I think, when I'd counted, but again, these maps are, yeah, it's something like that. Okay, so just interesting to know. So OCPs, Alan had talked about it. These are your growth guide for the municipality. It's a statement from you as council to your residents, to your future investors, future councils about what you as a municipality want to do in terms of growth. So what do we want to do in terms of agriculture? What do we want to do in terms of industry, resource and oil and gas? What do we want to do in terms of the environment, any social aspects, housing, things like that. So it's broad, it's a policy document, it kind of generally guides growth. Your zoning bylaw, it's more specific, it implements the policies that are in your official community plan, so it has those specific regulations. So, okay, an intensive livestock operation is a discretionary use in the ag district, okay? So it's more specific, it has such and such a setback from a house. So it gives you those criteria and specific standards for different types of land uses. So what's the difference? Well, your OCP or your official community plan, it's really broad, like I had said. It's broad in scope where your zoning bylaw is specific. Your OCP is your policy and your zoning bylaw are your regulations. And how I always get this question, how often do we use the official community plan? Because usually, municipalities tend to focus more on their zoning bylaw as the first thing that they focus on. So what I always say is council want to be familiar with what that plan states. I mean, if you created a plan or if you have a plan that says, we want to see commercial growth to the east, you're going to want to think about whether or not you want to consider a subdivision going on to the east, right? Okay, so those plans were carefully crafted. So always be familiar with what it states when you're making those day-to-day decisions, because it does sometimes get put on the wayside. Or another interesting one that I've seen actually, I had one question where an RM had wanted assistance with the servicing agreement. They had a lakeshore subdivision come up, and I had to go through the plans, and their official community plan or basic planning statement had said, we don't want to see any further lakefront subdivision, and this was a lakefront subdivision, so I had to say, okay, wait a minute, let's go back and look at this. Your policies said this, but you're moving forward with type of subdivision, did you guys know that your policies actually said this? So always be familiar with it. I know they're longer documents, but it's important with what they state, because there was research and effort put into that and stakeholders involved, so be familiar. Oops, sorry, skipped ahead too much. So your official community plan, what's in them? And I think, generally we had talked about the policies and the different types of uses and types of development that can take place. But I think anywhere, if you just Googled this, like an official community plan, I think anywhere in Canada, you'd kind of see the format the same. Alberta, they call them municipal development plans, but I think for the most part, official community plans or growth management plans. But you'll always see, a goal, an objective, and a policy, and some maps. That's basically what they'll include and what they'll look like. So your goals are, what are your overall general desired outcomes for a particular thing? So we want to encourage cost-effective development. So your objective would be kind of, okay, what are our steps to attain that goal? So we're going to encourage development where services exist, where the roads exist, right? Because using RM, you don't want to build up, 10 miles of road for one house. Might not be economically feasible. So your policy would be, okay, so we want to see commercial subdivisions located within 2 miles of Highway 33, right? Just as an example of kind of what types of things you can include. You don't have to be that specific, but those are some of the policies that some RMs have adopted. And then, of course, you have to look at the requirements. So through this process, we would look at, what does the Planning and Development Act say, the SPIs, and we would incorporate those types of things. So these are just some examples, and I know Ellen had showed you some examples already, but again, this states, all development is required to have, direct access to a developed road that's built to a standard sufficient to service the development. So then you as council have to determine, what's a sufficient standard in what case. Another one, where the construction of the road may be too costly to develop or maintain, council might refuse a development, okay? So you say, okay, this doesn't make sense, this is going to cost us too much for what it's worth, maybe it's not ideal for a municipality. And then all commercial development is required to be located within 2 miles of either side of the highway. So things like that. The zoning bylaw then, like we had talked about, they're more specific, so they have to have your zoning districts. So in a typical RM bylaw, you'd have your agricultural zoning district, which is mostly what everything is zoned as to start if you're starting from no plans. You might have some residential subdivision, some residential district, commercial district, and maybe a hamlet district if you have hamlets that you're dealing with in your RM. You have to have permitted and discretionary uses. So permitted are uses that are deemed appropriate for the zone. A house in a residential district would be, an appropriate use for that zone. Discretionary uses, so uses that may or may not be appropriate depending on the circumstances. And then your bylaw would provide criteria and conditions for these types of uses. So like an intensive livestock operation would probably be, a discretionary use in most RM zoning bylaws. So this is just one, what it might look like. Usually this is what it looks like. You have Section 5 is your agricultural district, permitted uses, a residence, resource-based uses are permitted, grain elevators are permitted, the discretionary uses is like your intensive livestock operation, any intensive ag operation. So again, you would have to define, what that is, what that means. You can be broad, like intensive ag operations, or you can specifically list those types of uses. So again, we work with you to kind of figure out what works best for your municipality. And again, something else that you can include in the zoning bylaw, this is just some sample parking requirements. This is from the City of Regina zoning bylaw. Again, you don't have to include these types of things if this is too specific, but this is just an example of what types of things you would want to look at having regulations for. Other things are like home-based businesses, intensive livestock operations, or things like bed and breakfasts as well. So what does an official community plan and zoning bylaw have to do with species at risk? So under the Planning and Development Act, you are required to identify what is called environmentally sensitive areas in an official community plan. So that's, I think really it's up to your municipality to determine kind of what those are. I mean, in each municipality's case, they might be different. It might be a water aquifer, or it might be a species at risk in this particular region. But in order to protect, environmentally sensitive areas from potential harmful developments, you need to identify and address them in your official community plan, okay? So typically an environmentally sensitive area are areas in a municipality that are important because of their unique environmental qualities. So rare and endangered species, any habitats of larger size or high diversity, maybe even any rare, unique type of landforms, critical wildlife, and even an ecosystem in a municipality. So those are the types of things that we would work with you with to determine. So how do you identify these lands? Well, studies and reports that are written and provided by other organizations, agencies, or stakeholders. And consultation with council and public, I think, is really important. We work with the RMs. A lot of them have some old and outdated plans. Or have none to begin with. So that initial meeting with council is really important to sit down and talk about, okay, what's existing, what do you guys have, what do you have for maps? Then we also consult with other agencies, so we always have a referral system with the Water Security Agency, Heritage Branch, Environment as well. So you need to do that background research while you're creating these plans. So we have an idea of what types of unique features we're dealing with to help you guys in your municipality. And there's other things like Googling. We even just Google it sometimes just to see what's going on in your area, because we do deal with all 296 RMs. Not specifically, but we do take day-to-day requests from them. So we want to know kind of what's going on in your area and what's going on in your region. And we use other websites like GeoSask too, just to kind of figure out geographically what's going on your lands. So this is just a map, if you can see it. This is the RM of South Qu'Appelle that we're working with. So one of the key ways to identifying these areas that we've identified as environmentally sensitive is to highlight them on a map. So you can see they highlighted all of their environmentally sensitive areas in yellow. So everything that kind of runs along the water bodies or water coulees. So that's a key step into identifying them, because what you guys see in your office is somebody comes in, they say, I want to put up a house here, I want to do this here. You as a development officer administrator, or your administrators, they're looking at paperwork. So they want to see, okay, now I know that particular location where this proposed development is, it's being proposed near an environmentally sensitive area. So now I know I have to, refer to Water Security Agency or do a number of different steps before I can actually issue a permit for that type of use. And this is from the RM of Edenwold's official community plan. So they're actually located on top of sensitive aquifers that provide an abundance of water. And they have a lot of development taking place. They're just east of Regina. So they have a number of high-level safeguards that they incorporated just to ensure, the long-term sustainability of those aquifers. So they've identified that area as sensitive. They've highlighted it in the shaded area so that when developments come in, that might have a potential impact on this system, they refer it and they work with other stakeholders like the Water Security Agency for review and advice prior to approval, okay? So key point, have it in your planning documents. How that is, again, we work with you depending on what's going on in your area. So how can they actually be protected? We know they're there, we've mapped them out. What do we need to do to actually protect them? So your policies and regulations, that's what gives you as a municipality to say yes or no, or give you guidance on how to make a decision on different types of development and when those developments take place. So it's important to have policies that allow the RM to do the appropriate, or get their developer to do the appropriate checks and balances prior to development taking place. So again, have it in your policy and regulations so you can actually implement. And I'll go through what that means more specifically. Oh yeah, so as an example, in your zoning bylaw, this was just I think I just had found this one online. This is in an example zoning bylaw regulation. They have identified wildlife habitat as a sensitive area. So where development is proposed in an area identified as containing wildlife habitat, the development officer or the administrator may require the applicant to provide additional information that's required by the Wildlife Habitat Protection Act. Council may prohibit development and recommend subdivision refusal where proposals may affect the long-term conservation of these areas. Council may specify development and subdivision requirements based on reports from qualified consultants or officials from the provincial government and so on. Okay, so those are the types of things you want to include because it does involve a number of different stakeholders. So it's really important to have good research and background information. And I'm assuming, again, I don't know what the action plan will contain, but I'm assuming it'll have some type of recommendations that you guys will have to look at and kind of see, what can we do on our local level to encourage appropriate development in those areas. So how do we balance industry development with environmentally sensitive areas? You have things like species at risk and oil and gas. Well, and again, it's a balancing act like Alan had mentioned. So it's really important to do all of that research while you're developing your plan. So identify suitable areas in your municipality. So we know oil and gas is generally here. This is where we're going to encourage the industrial type of developments to take place. We know species at risk exist here, so we're going to map those out and make sure we can clearly identify them to kind of keep those two uses separate. So consultation with stakeholders. So you consult with the provincial, federal governments and organizations, the public, the ratepayers. So you have to prioritize and set those goals. How do you want to see the RM grow in the next 5 to 10, 15 years? I always get that comment when I go out to RM meetings and they say, nothing will happen here, but then 5 years later they're calling me, and I've been there for 5 years, so I can actually say that, and it did happen. They call me and say, we have this huge lakeshore subdivision, we don't have any plans. Okay, well, we have to look at what you can do now to do that. But it does happen, I guess, point of my story. So set a precedent and set the stage for the next council and residents that will actually live in the area. So this is just an example future land use concept map that you would, you'd include something like this nature in your official community plan, but the pink is where, this is from Alberta, Parkland County. Again, I just Googled it and found one online. So the pink is where they want to see industrial growth. The green is where their natural areas are. So you can kind of see, okay, we know this exists here, we want to put this here, and then this exists here. So they're separate, we know that they're identified. So what happens if you don't have plans in place, you have no policies, you have no regulations, then you really have no say as to where development can locate. You can't protect those special areas. You have no ability to really guide and manage development, basically, beyond your general road maintenance or, things like that. So it's really important to have these plans in place. Again, it's not required. You do have to think about those other things like enforcement and, what capacity do we have as a municipality to have these plans in place and these policies. But they're really important, especially when you have such different resources in your municipality or in the region, I guess, as a whole. So next, I just kind of want to go through, I know some of you have plans, some of you don't have plans, some of you have maybe outdated or older plans. So I just kind of want to take you through the steps of actually how to create an official community plan and zoning bylaw. And again, it's not an overnight process. It doesn't happen in a month. I think the quickest I've seen a plan kind of come into place is about like 8 months to a year, and that's really good. Like, you're involving a lot of stakeholders. There's, it has to be approved by the province. There's a number of council meetings. There's public meetings involved. So it's not an overnight process. So it's not a quick fix. And these are really carefully crafted documents. We want to make sure that they're useful to you, so that we aren't, adopting them and then just having to re-amend them as soon as you have them because you have something come up that, doesn't fit with what we've created for you. So be prepared that it is a longer process.
Are you saying OCB and a zoning bylaw?
Yeah, they go hand in hand, yes. So you have an official, yeah, both all together, 1 year usually. And we develop them hand in hand, so it's kind of a joint process. Again, it depends on what's going on in your RM2. Again, you guys, if you have lots of development, it'll take a little bit longer. Oh, sorry, so this is just an overview of the steps. So the first step would be, and I'm going to go through these in more detail of what's actually involved and what the process includes, but the first step is the preliminary review of key issues, which I kind of went through already with you. Then you might want to consult with a professional. You have to consult with a professional community planner, and I'll go through those requirements. Some type of public consultation. Then you're going to gather all of that information that had taken place and the background information, and from there you'll draft your actually planning documents. Then you'll go through another round of public consultations. Council, once you get a draft the council's comfortable with, they'll review it and approve it, and then it has to go through the community planning approval as well. So preliminary review of key issues. So we talk about, what's the current issues for the municipality. We sit down, we have, a specific set of questions. We talk about, what types of developments are taking place, where are they taking place, what capacity do you have to deal with these types of developments, what's needed. I always get emails or calls saying, do we need a plan, Dana? And I say, well, okay, give me what you're dealing with. And then I say, okay, well, what's going on? What triggered this question? I need to, ask certain questions. Maybe they're amending their bylaws once a month, so obviously something's not working for them. Or again, they got a request for a lakeshore subdivision for 200 parcels, so it doesn't fit into what their existing policies state. So yes, okay, something's not working for you that we need to look at changing. So maybe you probably, as a municipality, you might not have the resources to ask these questions, so you bring in professionals to help with this. So again, it is required under the Act that an official community plan be prepared in consultation with a registered professional planner. So I put this information up here. So SPPI, or the Saskatchewan Professional Planning Institute, and CIP, the Canadian Institute of Planners, they are the professional institutions and certification bodies for planning in Saskatchewan and for Canada. So they're kind of like the voice for the planning community. So they have a website, and they provide actually a list of who's a full member. And they provide a list of planning consultants as well, private consultants, if you're looking for a private consultant to hire as well. So you might want a planner, again, going back to those questions, to facilitate and ask those key questions, to look at, what are the most important things in our municipality? Are our plans outdated? We have too many subdivision requests. We can't, our policies don't allow us to look at these types of developments in an appropriate way. So they can kind of do an initial analysis of what's going on at the beginning stages. So you've decided, okay, yeah, we're going to update our plans, we're going to adopt new plans. The first thing, again, like I said, we sit down, talk with council. We might have some type of initial public consultation, like send out a questionnaire or have like an open house just to talk about, what is it that you want to see in your community. We want to see residential growth. We don't want to see commercial development. What are some other ones? Our primary focus is agriculture. We're an agricultural RM. We want to see limited residential growth, very minimal commercial development, or maybe you're just a council that's open to any type of development. So really, those are the types of things we want to find out from you as council we consult with, and then we can go to the public as well. So you look at what you want, what do you have, or where do you sit right now, and then what are the things that you need to actually make those changes take place. So planning, it is a public process. I know there was a question about what's the requirement, and I'll go through the adoption process, and that's what's required under the Act. But we always say, do some type of preliminary public consultation at the early onsets, because then you have input from the public. You're not just drafting a plan, and then when it comes to time to adopting it, you then have to go to the public, and then you realize, oh, okay, this is something that we didn't think of, or we need to change. Now we have to go back and redo that whole process. So have some type of initial public consultation at the early onset, so just to kind of keep you guys on track, and maybe there are things that maybe you as council had missed or didn't think of. And we can do that in any forum, like open houses, questionnaires, public meetings, and so on. And we get this question a lot, it's my land, why do I want regulations on my land? And I always put this cartoon up. We use it in our MLDP sessions, because I think it's funny. It has somebody saying, no zoning, he's opposed to zoning, and then something happens on, right next to his land, and it says, okay, maybe I'll reconsider my possession. So not until it happens to you do you care. That's reality, that's just life. But in all honesty, planning, it's not meant to hinder development. There are certain requirements, but it can be used to promote your community if that's what you want, and really protect what exists in your municipality. So it's common sense land use that it's established in writing, and it can be regulated by you as a municipality. And you're protecting the public from future implications, incompatible land uses, and potential hazardous areas. So from there, then we gather your data, background information. We do some inventory of the assets that's in the municipality. We look at the local economy, what drives the industry, oil and gas, agriculture. What's the population? What's the demographics? Have you gained, population in the last 4 or 5 years? Have you lost? Has that population decreased? If so, why? What are the reasons for it? What do we want to do about it? What's the history and culture? Any historical sites in the area, historical sensitive areas, environment. Do we have any flood hazard areas? Are there any known, ducks unlimited lands, or maybe co-op grazing pasture lands, things like that. Infrastructure, what's our road system like? What are our primary grids? Where do we want to see those types of future developments take place on what types of roads? And again, this process does involve other stakeholders. So this is when we would consult with other agencies to answer questions like, the setback question. So then we would go back and consult with those provincial agencies to answer and come back with, and create a policy that works with both. So based on that information, we can create some drafts. So we gather up that information, then we go back to council and say, here's your first draft. We walk them through those drafts. We answer any important questions. This is where you have to ask those questions. What does this mean for me? What does this policy mean? And they can be long meetings, but it's good to go through and ask those specific questions, because at the end of the day, you're responsible to enforce these documents. So we want to make sure that you're comfortable with them and we know how to administer them. So once we get a copy that council is comfortable with, council can then review and finally do the final review, and adoption process. So council has a draft copy that they're happy with, they're comfortable with. Say, okay, Dana, we're ready to adopt these plans. So they give it first reading, and then you would set a public hearing date. Then you would have to advertise, put a notice in the local newspapers, and there's a certain time frame requirement for that. Then you hold a formal public hearing. So then you open up the floor to any comments that the public has. And then if there's no changes from that hearing, then you can give it second and final reading, and then that is then sent to the Ministry of Government Relations for final approval. If there are changes from that hearing, then we have to go back, look at re-advertising, and then setting another public hearing date, which is why it's so important to have that initial public consultation at the early onset, so you don't have to kind of repeat that process once you're kind of already established in the game. Then it's sent to the community planning branch review. Alan had already talked about, how they're the approving authority for the RMs in the province, and then these plans don't actually come in effect until they've received approval from the ministry. So what happens if you have an outdated plan? Basic planning statement or development plans, they're still valid, like Alan had said, but they can't contravene the Planning and Development Act or the statements of provincial interest. So you can either, look at doing an amendment, and depending on how much you want to amend, so it doesn't contravene, or just look at adopting a new plan altogether. So then you'd be subject to the process that I had just talked about. But again, the plans should work for you, not against you. So review them regularly and just make sure that they're working for you and what's going on in your municipality. So say you do have planning documents and you want to look at how to amend this, and Alan had briefly touched on this again. And I get the question all the time is, how many are too many? Because some are constantly amending their planning documents, and it's not easy because each municipality has different circumstances that they're dealing with. So what I always say is, proceed with caution. Don't just treat it as another piece of paperwork either. Okay, so you can do amendments, but just don't treat it as that. These plans were carefully crafted, so there should be a demonstrated need for the amendment and prove how it will benefit the municipality. So make sure you're still achieving those goals. Unless the plan is completely outdated, which is why you're amending it, so then create kind of a new plan. So amendments, there's different types of amendments Alan talked about. You get a request, somebody wants to rezone their land, so you get that as a request. Any addition or removal of a provision or use, so I want to put up a barn or something and it's not a listed use, even though it probably would be. That's not a good example. But anyway, so it's not listed as a use, so somebody can request to amend the bylaw that way. Or maybe just for clarification-wise, because something was missed during the creation process. So, oops, sorry, I keep moving ahead too fast. So then if it was requested by a developer or ratepayer, there'd be some type of application and fee. If not, then you as a municipality would just draft that bylaw, or we can help you with that as well. Take it to council. Council has to approve that, and then there is giving it first reading, the notice requirements, putting it in the paper and advertising, and then giving it second and third reading, and then it has to go to the minister for final approval as well. So next, I just wanted to kind of talk about regional planning a little bit more. Can you collaborate as a region? The species at risk, it doesn't just stop in one municipality's boundaries. It's a regional quality or form on land, so it crosses a large area of the southwest portion of the province. So municipalities, you guys can work together and collaborate as a formal or informal planning group. And I think at the end of the day, it probably would be beneficial to have some type of similar policies and regulations or shared goals on this. And I'm assuming that's probably what will be some of the outcomes from this action plan. They'll give you sort of more guidance on what those should specifically be. I am not sure what those should be, but how you can actually use that plan moving forward from here. So there are quite a few municipalities working at the regional level. All are for a number of different reasons. Saskatoon and Corman Park work together, lots of development outside of the city. We work with the Calling Lakes, which is the RM of North Capel and Fort Capel and Katepwa, Lebret, and Fort San, and Resort Village of Beseda. And so they came together because they're all along the Qu'Appelle Valley Lakes, and so they came together and formed a planning commission to create a district plan because they wanted to all have consistent policies. They were having a lot of developers come into the area. One was saying, these are our regulations, this is our regulations, and developers don't really see that. They just come in and say, okay, I want to put this up, what do I have to do? So when it's different and you're dealing with the same unique landform, it's good to have kind of consistent policies in place. So regional planning, the way I decipher it in my mind, I don't know if this is actually, formal way of establishing it, but I call it formal and informal planning. Formal is like a planning district. You have, legally binding agreements that you enter into, or informal. So that's just like you're sharing staff. You might have some consistent regulations. You might meet up once or twice a year and say, hey, what are we going to do with emergency services and so on. So there's a number of different ways you can collaborate as a region. How you want to do that, that's totally up to you to decide. So formal planning district, this is when 2 or more municipalities enter into a planning district, which can be operated by a commission or a planning authority. The boundaries would then need to be established. So, maybe it's an RM or, a town and a village, or all RMs and so on. So you enter into an agreement with those municipalities and you set the rules and regulations for that area. Excuse me. In regards to plans, you would have a district plan. So that would be like your official community plan, but at a district level. So both municipalities would adopt this district plan. From there, you can have your individual plan. So, okay, we have a district plan. It's pretty vague. More specifically, we have this in our one RM, but not in the other RM. So you can actually adopt an individual official community plan to address what's not in your district plan, if you need it. If not, you can use the district plan just as your official community plan. And from there, you'd have your individual zoning bylaw. And I use the Colleen Lakes District Planning Commission, and I'll go through some of the examples that they had set out in their district plan. We had helped them with developing a district plan. So one of their goals is to ensure that future development within the district does not have a negative impact on the water quality, any environmentally resources, sensitive areas within and surrounding the valley and lake. So one of their policies that all the municipalities that I had mentioned previously adopted, they stated that on environmentally sensitive lands, development will not be considered unless mitigation measures, as determined through a professional report, can be achieved. So during the subdivision process, where these areas are determined to be unsuitable, the Commission will encourage a municipality that it's taking place in to designate these areas as environmental reserve during the subdivision process. So that's one way how they conserve those sites or particular areas in the valley. So again, all municipalities would have to adhere to this district plan, but it is an option. Informal planning groups. Again, these can range from, just having shared services, emergency service delivery. You meet a few times a year just to kind of discuss some common issues that's going on. So really it can be in any form. SODCAP would be kind of like an informal planning group. I know the arm of Bone Creek and Arlington, they work together to develop new official community plans and zoning bylaws, and both their offices are both out of Shaunavon, so they had hired our services. So I'd went out, helped the arm of Bone Creek in the morning, the arm of Arlington in the afternoon, so they kind of shared, the costs for that. So they worked kind of together. They had similar plans and they wanted to adopt similar plans because there's so much similarities going on, being adjacent to one another. So that was how they worked together informally. Is anybody else involved in like an informal planning group besides SODCAP? Is there another one? I thought is Arma Piapot, are they here? Are they part? Is there Southwest? Oh, okay. So you're part of that one too. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Are you part? Is MCDP? Are you working with MCDP on something like the Southwest Regional Planning? Don't think so. Oh, okay. Okay. I just thought I seen something, but okay. MCDP work. They facilitate a lot of like regional initiatives, so that's why I thought I seen their names on there, but. I could be. I think I'm flying through this really quickly, but we have lots of times for questions after. So where do you guys go from here now? Now that we know, this information and are kind of waiting for that final action plan. Moving forward, what you as a municipality need to address and discuss is, how can you take what's identified in the action plan that's being prepared, and how do you work collaboratively to implement those recommendations and action items? So again, I'm not sure what's specifically in that action plan, but we talked about, coming up with using that plan and coming up with consistent policies and regulations for species at risk, and of course other important aspects as well that might cross boundaries that you guys can talk about as a region maybe. amend existing plans and adopt policies and regulations. So if you want to just look at the plan and adopt it individually, you can certainly do that, but you might have to amend your existing plans and regulations, or maybe you need to look at adopting a new plan because you don't have one in place, or think about it anyways, it's not mandatory. And then how do you want to look at, moving forward through regional planning, maybe as a collective? Those are just some things to think about. Again, I'm not familiar with what the action plan really states. So just a quote to kind of leave you off with. It says, "Our land has not been handed down to us by our parents. It has been loaned to us by our children." Author unknown. So just some food for thought and conclusion. So there's our contact information. Heather's the other planner in our department. She's at the office manning the fort for today. So are there any, questions or comments through the process? Yeah, sure.
There's a couple of these still need grasslands in the R&R environment sensitive to their species risk habitat rates. So does that apply to leased and deed lands where a council can say the landowner can't break up that land?
So it would be to all, like in the RM, if you have particular lands, yeah, and there's no other regulations that would specifically apply, yes, then like it's up to, so it's everything that's in the RM, that's you guys regulate, with everything that you have authority to regulate.
Breaking up the native grass, if you deem it environmentally.
Yeah, like we would create policies to kind of look at what are some of the options, how can we look at preserving that? So there'd be like maybe a specific district, we would have to zone it to kind of keep it in its natural state, right?
So if we were to get you, or to have you come out or whatever, what's your timeline like?
We are busy. We do work with all RMs. I think we have about 25 projects on the go. I don't know. Like it depends, because like for right now we're really busy. Usually, I'd say give us like a month or two to get things started. I always say, because like right now we're really busy. We have lots of meetings. I think it's just because it's the beginning of the year. Everybody's sort of starting their new projects. So, but we try to work on a good timeline. Are there any other questions on that? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you outlined some very specific steps for how to proceed through the process of beginning the OCP process and then finalizing it. I'm wondering, in your experience, how many RMs follow those steps exactly? Is there any wiggle room? How much of it can occur before they actually speak with a professional planner? And how, if possible, can costs be minimized? I know that banding together and RMs sharing the cost of an official planner is one way, but is there anything that they can do on their own before they actually engage with a planner?
Yeah, so first question is there any wiggle room with the initial process? So, and again, it's different for every municipality. Sometimes we have 6 or 7 council meetings with me, just with me and council to talk about those issues. Some RMs it's one meeting and I get all of the information that I need to draft the plan. So again, it depends on kind of how specific you want those policies, because sometimes if you have a lot going on, it's going to take more time, right? There's more things we need to weed out, there's more stakeholders we need to involve. If you're just an agricultural RM, it might not take as much time, so there's not a lot of background information that can be done. So there is wiggle room. So it's a case-by-case basis, I guess. So it's not set in stone that we have to do it that way.
So you can keep your zoning relatively simple then if the council wants it, just has specific setbacks or certain things.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be as long as it meets the PDA. Like some things we might have to tweak to make it comply with the provincial legislation, or depending on what your official community plan says. But yeah, if you want it simple, then that's kind of what we work with. Costs, yeah, you can work regionally. Or, you can do a lot of that background work, I find. So if we send a questionnaire out and you can kind of give me that information, that helps. We work with RMs if you have a set amount established, that's your budget for the year, we try and work with you, so then we can either work remotely, like if you say, okay, I have, $5,000 I want to put towards these plans, and we can make sure you fit that budget. So we, maybe that's just me having teleconference calls, or, the administrator may be doing more of the work, or the counselor's doing a lot more of the work. So less cost, more work that you would do, I guess, so to speak. So you have a question?
My question is, does your department have a set of definitions for various things? I mean, or does council have to define everything, like you have to define development, you have to define this and that, all where,
Yeah.
set?
There's like standard definitions we start with usually, and then from there we can tweak them. Like if we realize, I don't even know an example off the top of my head. Like if there's something that we need to refine, maybe like recreational vehicles. I had this one yesterday. Recreational vehicles and like camper trailers and things like that. We had to specifically, I'm dealing with lots of lakeshore right now, as you can tell. We specifically define those differently. So I knew that was an issue, so we had to define them specifically. Otherwise, we could just have like recreational vehicle as a general standard definition. And we would provide that kind of to you in the first draft, and then we can tweak it if there's something more specific that you need.
Okay, I wondered about that.
Yeah.
When you're on, do we have to define all these things?
Yeah, like we kind of give you a sample template, and then we can refine it from there. So that's kind of like your general definition everywhere. So.